Welcome everyone to our AAPI Strong California Roundtable. I'm Pat Falkushita and President and CEO of the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce. And thank you all for joining us for this very important conversation today. Today's event is the second in a series of 3 roundtable events where we will explore the AAPI experience within our small businesses and within the community as a whole. If you're joining us for the very first time, AAPI Strong California is a part of a national movement called AAPI Strong, led by our good friend and partner, the National AAPI Chamber, National ACE. Together, our goal is to connect AAPI Strong small business owners throughout the United States with resources to combat discrimination and find solutions together. These solutions have taken the form of this roundtable series and virtual trainings that we have been hosting since the start of the year. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website, which will be shared in the chat. I would like to take this moment to thank our sponsors of the program here in California. Let's thank Wells Fargo, Verizon, PG&E, East West Bank, EASE, and PepsiCo Foundation. Thank you all again for making these virtual and vital conversations possible. And now I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi, who will be giving us some opening remarks. Assemblymember Murasuchi represents the 66th Assembly District located in the South Bay of Los Angeles County. A longtime South Bay resident, husband, father, and a former Deputy Attorney General with the California Department of Justice and a former Torrance School Board member, the Assemblymember's priorities are jobs, education, healthcare, the environment, public safety, veterans, and our AAPI communities. Please join me in welcoming Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi.
All right, thank you, Pat, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi. I have the privilege of representing the South Bay area of Los Angeles County, including communities of Los Angeles, Torrance, Gardena, Palos Verdes, and the beach cities, many of the communities with large API populations. I want to thank the Cal Asian Chamber for your leadership, especially in the last couple of years during the pandemic. You know, we know that the pandemic was a difficult time for all of us, but especially for small businesses. I know that, you know, one of the things that I'm proud of is that we have what I consider to be among the best Hawaiian food in my district in the South Bay. And, you know, there was one particular restaurant that I'll call out, Cherry Stones in Gardena, where I would get my fix of Hawaiian food. But during the pandemic, you know, I would go there to get food to go all the time because, you know, I so desperately wanted to support our favorite small businesses during the pandemic so that they can come out on the other end of the pandemic to be strong and to continue to provide some of their great food and great services to our community. And I think that's just one example of many about how, you know, we really worked hard to support our small businesses, you know, making sure that they were getting the PPP loans, the state COVID relief grants, anything possible to help our small businesses deal with the huge downturn, the shutdowns, and you know, we're hopeful that we have turned the corner and that things have been getting much better since the worst of the pandemic. We know that we're continuing to struggle with you know, big challenges, inflation, supply chain, crime, and especially hate crimes. Let me talk a quick bit about hate crimes. As we all know, you know, there's been a dramatic spike in the number of hate crimes, specifically targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders during the pandemic. We saw a lot of that, you know, being spurred by scapegoating of API people, API communities for the COVID-19 virus. And unfortunately, those challenges continue. The California Legislative API Caucus, we were proud to have delivered over $150 million in funding for our Asian American and Pacific Islander organizations to support, our communities to deal with hate crimes, to support victims, as well as to work with law enforcement and others to make sure that we can do everything we need to do, that we absolutely must do in order to protect our communities. So, with that, I look forward, Pat, to the discussion here this afternoon. And thank you again for letting me join all of you. Oh, did we lose Pat? There we go. Oh.
Hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you so much. Al, I'm so appreciative and thank you so much. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Ms. Sonia Harris, who's the Senior Advisor for the COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force for the Department of Health Services for the state of California. Sonia.
Thank you so much, Pat, and the entire team at the Asian Chamber for always putting together opportunities for us to really demonstrate, I think, what API Strong sort of means, right? How do we embrace our heritage? How do we continue to acknowledge intersections? But most importantly, how do we really learn, grow, and support each other? So, so honored to be with everyone, at least virtually. I know we're getting back into the swing of things in person, but again, so grateful. As I really have the opportunity to have spent the last 18 months at the forefront of a pretty tough space to be in, working to educate our communities about COVID-19 vaccines. I can't help but reflect on so much that we've seen, not only over the last 18 months as vaccines have been available, but even longer. At least I tend to think of being so lucky to be here in California with folks like Assemblymember Murasuchi and the entire API caucus that have really stepped forward with that proposal that he just mentioned, that more than 150 million. That's a historic investment. And really, with the partnership with the Commission for API Affairs, really then implementing that in programs across all of state government to provide better services, more services to our community, whether that be in language or otherwise. So I also want to start with a moment of gratitude, again, for the incredible leadership that we have here. As we think about, again, the work that we've been able to do, even with I'm so excited to be here with the panelists I have today. We really hope to create a safe space for us to have this conversation, so please chime in along the way. One of the things that really resonated as well is that this type of discrimination and hate, I don't want to repeat it, but the things that we've heard about where COVID-19 came from, aren't new, right? These are things that our community has seen time and time again over history. We've also seen brothers and sisters experience this, post 9/11, what, the Muslim and Sikh communities might have seen just as an example, and really taking a moment that COVID really just is spotlighting it. But, hopefully as we continue to recover from this in so many ways, the resilience that is California, our nation, our community, that we really find ourselves in a brighter space. When I got asked to help stand up and run the state's public education effort, it really came off of the heels of doing similar work, trying to get our community counted. As the fastest growing community in California, pretty incredible work. But I really think that that work comes from a place also of acknowledging that not any one sector, whether that be business or government, can tackle some of these problems alone. And so as we think about the conversation today, really, how can we continue to solve the greatest problems before us? This deep-rooted discrimination, the hate, the way that we're seeing people show up and really band together with that sort of common lens of humanity, right? At the end of the day, how do we all want to be treated, right? Going back to that golden rule. And so, I couldn't be more grateful for being here today to contribute and to help, shape some of the dialogue that we'll have. As I think about being the daughter of a Korean immigrant, I remember one thing that has really shaped the way that I try to show up, not only for my team, but also, in just different settings that I'm in. I remember going to the grocery store. I grew up in a pretty rural area of California. So as you can imagine, I didn't really often see too many kids that looked like me. And I remember accompanying my mother to the grocery store and she was paying, I think it was probably maybe in middle school. English is not her first language. And so I could see her struggling in the conversation, with the cashier, and the cashier was getting pretty direct with her in a way that, I sort of saw as maybe not being right. And so I remember inserting myself into that situation and saying, I'm so sorry, is something wrong? And immediately I could see the woman's face, and obviously this is a pretty vivid memory, just sort of become flush. And, she said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I think she realized, like, oh, wait, you speak English. And so, really, I think that gave a good opportunity for approaching problems, at least for me personally, with you don't know what's happening on the other side, right? We don't know what that person is, their background, who they've come with, and really just trying to continue to approach the way we show up in a way that's respectful, in a way that gives a whole lot of grace, especially now with all things COVID and who knows what's on someone's mind at any given moment and all the pressures they might be facing. But most importantly, making sure that we share our story and continue to band together again. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our wonderful moderator, Sharon.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you for your inspiring words and setting the tone. You'll be joining our roundtable in just a few minutes, so thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Ito. I am your moderator, formerly with KCAL TV 9 in Los Angeles as a reporter, and also channels 10 and 31 in Sacramento. Thank you to all of you in our chat for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And we really do want this to be an online discourse. And so, join the conversation, engage with each other, engage with our panelists. But before we do, we have prepared a special video to establish why it's important that we are here today and showing up. So here's the video.
喂，小来啦，我是妈妈，知道你还没回家呢。我和大一现在在医院呢。今天在街上有人推他，他摔了。 我们在这儿可能暂时还回不去。弟弟放学后，你要好好照顾弟弟，应该帮着做做饭。饭我已经焖好了，菜也切好了，葱姜也准备好了，你就炒一下就可以了，好不好？就这样，有事给我打电话，好吗？好，再见。
Hate reverberates. That's something that we want to talk about today, both in our discussion and in our online show. Go back to your country. Your English is so good. Keep your head down. What were some of the things that you heard growing up, or even now, that continue to make you feel like an outsider, that perpetual foreigner, other, not fully American? Share some of your reactions to that video, Hate Reverberates, in our chat. And we'll continue to look at the chat as we continue our conversation. And while you're doing that, I want to set the stage for all of you today. Above all, as we've been saying, this is a secure, safe place to share your experience. We encourage you to engage with us, each other, but to do so in a respectful manner. Also, there are many things that have happened to our AAPI community during the pandemic, from the highest triumphs to the most solemn lows. So if there is a topic that we cover that poses a trigger, an emotional trigger, take the time to step away from this conversation. Do some self-care and come back when you're feeling better. As you have heard, there has been deep-rooted hate and prejudice against Asians that dates back years. Anti-Asian hate in America is nothing new. So what feels different today? How is the response different today when it comes to hate crimes and discrimination against the AAPI community? Today, our panelists will talk about how we combat that hate and how we can work toward helping people feel safe again. But first, we want to look at the chat and feel free to participate. I do want to let you know that at the bottom of your screen is the Q&A function, and we're going to spend about the last 10 minutes of our conversation devoted to your questions. So go ahead and share some of your questions there at the Q&A function. And now we have three panelists who come from different professional backgrounds and professional experiences, and each is a strong AAPI woman. So let's start with self-introductions and share a brief highlight of their work. Our panel consists of Christina Yang, Marianne Foon, and again, Sonya Harris. But let's start our introductions with Christina Yang.
Thank you, Sharon. I was crying during that video because my parents are from, sorry, I'm still a little emotional as my first time actually seeing the video. My parents immigrated from Taiwan, and just the voicemail just made me think of my own mother. Sorry, just very, very touching, and made me think a lot about how our community really has pulled together during the last couple of years. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time. My name is Christina Yang. I'm the General Counsel and Pro Bono Director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. In my GC role, I support and advise our management team, help manage risk for our organization. As Pro Bono Director, I coordinate and outreach to both attorney and non-attorney volunteers that help support our programmatic work. And my third job, as I like to say, is overseeing our bystander intervention training program, which is where I'm hoping to share a little bit more about our work in that area and how it ties to our anti-Asian hate work in general. But I'm really excited to spend the next hour with everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. And when you're in the trenches every day, that does affect you. You are a professional, but you also, have feelings. And
Oh,
so,
totally.
we understand that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Marianne Foon, you're also right there, ground zero.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne Foon. I'm the Executive Director of AAPICA, Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance. And we actually started the agency in 1997. And a part of it was a response to the hate crime killing of a young man, Tianmin Lee. And what we had, I grew up, like Sonia, I grew up in a rural county in Northern California where Asians first went. My family went there in the 1800s and 1850s. And the amount of racism I grew up with really impacted me. So when I moved to Orange County, and I felt like I went back 20 years because there was a lot of hate. And I moved to Orange County in 1990. But, shortly thereafter, young man Tianmin Lee was brutally murdered. And the killer was only caught because he wrote a letter to his cousin saying, "Oh, I just killed a Jap." And it was really great. So AAPICA was started to address, a lot of the hate that was occurring, but also to provide direct services, because we found that the community, even though we represent 25% of the county, that a lot of Asians had no voice. And, just like the comments that we saw, keep your head down, don't make waves, stay quiet, that was occurring. And so we created AAPICA as not only direct services, but advocacy. So we wouldn't have to be quiet, that we could have a voice, but that we could empower and support people to have that voice. So I'll talk a little bit later, but we have a large mental health program, workforce development. We work with small businesses. We do youth and leadership development and civic engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne. And certainly the response this time around was different. There was a community coming together, and it wasn't only AAPIs, it was an alliance that was growing. Let's say hello again to our third panelist, Sonia Harris.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I have the opportunity, as I mentioned, to oversee the state's COVID-19 vaccination effort. But really, again, how it links back to the census work is we get to support day in and day out hundreds of community trusted messengers. I'm so lucky that both Mary and Christina's organizations are part of that work. And what that really means is partnering with those that already have trust with the API community, that understand their needs, that understand their language and their culture. But even more importantly, how do they use this work to broaden all of the other reach that they have, right? So how is some of the vaccine work connecting to and building that capacity or those connections that they might not have had otherwise, those conversations, ultimately saving lives, but also, finding other ways to complement that with the amazing services that Mary had mentioned as an example. So excited again to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. Another question I want to pose as we set the tone is, this is an AAPI Strong Forum. So what does it mean to you and your work to be AAPI Strong? Marianne.
I think to be AAPI strong, it's one is to know our histories and know the resiliency of our communities, and that culture is a strength. So many times we were taught that culture is a barrier, culture is a hindrance, assimilate better, learn English. And what we find is that, our communities have survived centuries, and as immigrants and refugees that have come here, we bring so many positive assets. And so AAPI Strong means coming together, celebrating each other, coming and working together, all sectors, from businesses to community-based organizations to churches and temples. We have to come together to be stronger. And then also building allies. What made us strong, just like what you're saying, Sharon, about what was different, was that a lot of people stood up and said, you know what, this is not right. What's happening into the Asian community? We need to, address this. We need to stop this. And also, I think, we're coming off Black Lives Matter, and we were having really core conversations about what does it mean for Black Lives Matter and how we're a part of that, or our own, racism that we have. So I think we started having really deep conversations about all of this, and it created alliances that grew stronger, because racism has been around forever and it continues. And it's, I thought for a while, oh, it's getting better, but actually it's not. It was just percolating again. And so we have to really create these alliances and work with our allies to ensure we are AAPI strong.
But you do point out an important topic, and that is our own racism and owning that, where our own biases are, and understanding that. Christina, AAPI Strong, what does that mean to you and your work?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sharon. I think similar to what Marianne just shared, I think it really brings to mind not only the community members that we serve, who are largely AAPI, but also folks from other communities in need as well, but also supporters of ours who, don't necessarily need free or reduced fee services directly, but they want to support community members who do. And so I think it's been, as terrible as the rise in anti-Asian hate was that we saw last year, I think the outpouring of support from AAPI community members in general, as well as other communities, just folks from other communities of color serving organizations that we have relationships with previously and have done coalition building work with before, seeing them come out and want to either make public statements or take particular actions or make particular investments that are supportive of AAPI community needs specifically. I think that's been really amazing to see. So I feel like AAPI Strong goes beyond just the AAPI community itself into the broader network that we're also lucky to work with and be supported by.
And the challenge is to sustain, the building of allies. And, we were the headline last year, what's the media attention?
Totally.
Right.
Exactly.
Sonia, AAPI Strong in your work. You've been in a lot of different areas in public service. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. A couple different things. I couldn't agree more with sort of the intersectionality and building those allies and having those conversations that have already been mentioned. And I would add on to say it means I think leading by example and being brave and vulnerable. I'm so fortunate that at the time that I was leading the census office at the outset of COVID, the holler back training had been something that was widely produced early on. And so what that meant for me is, wow, look at this great opportunity, this resource that I had the opportunity to share with all of our staff. And we were a majority minority staff, so pretty incredible space to be in already. but the types of conversation and the fact that our team felt seen and heard, but most importantly, felt like they had a tool to understand what they could do, right? If they saw something like that as they were in their own community, how could they feel safe and comfortable to intervene, to speak up, to be brave, but also feel comfortable doing that, ready to do that, prepared to do that. And so, for me, I think it's just the impact that we have either providing services as state government or even just in leading our own teams and recognizing that they go home to live their own lives and contribute, what that does really if they feel supported in the work environment as well.
So Hollerback was one of the trainings to get involved and to do so safely and with impact. Christina, Asian Americans Advancing Justice in LA, also took the lead in developing bystander training. But think about it in the moment. You're seeing something, you're shocked in the moment. How effective has the training been?
Thanks, Sharon. And I'm actually just going to put in the chat here the link to the page on our website that shares more about our bystander intervention trainings. We actually also partner with Hollaback, which has recently rebranded to be called Right to Be. So we and others in our Advancing Justice affiliation nationwide have partnered with Right to Be to bring the bystander intervention training largely to a virtual audience of over 150,000 people actually since the program started with our DC affiliate over 2 years ago now. So it's been really exciting. I think the vast majority of that six-figure number was actually trained last year, during all the intense interest around finding ways to stand in solidarity with the community and feel like there was something tangible that one could invest their time in and energy in, so that when they're out in the world, out in their community, they can feel ready to actually do something. If, as Sonia pointed out, if they feel comfortable, if they feel safe, if they feel like the moment is right to actually intervene. And we do share the statistic during our training. Over 79% of people feel like bystander intervention does make a difference. However, only about 25% of people who've experienced harassment actually say afterwards that someone did intervene. So we're trying to close that gap between the number of people who think it would be helpful and the number of people who actually did have someone help. And as we do share in the training itself, intervening can take a lot of different forms, and only one of them is actually direct intervention, which I think is what comes to mind most readily. But there are other ways to support, like checking on the person after they've experienced the incident, help them process what they've been through, support them in their time of need. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So intervention, as you said, can take place hours, maybe days after the incident as a show of support. But there's a mental health aspect to that. There's also the isolation that we felt during the pandemic, as well as other stresses. And Marianne, what services were you providing, and how were things in Orange County?
So I think there's been a lot of surveys and studies that showed, not just in Orange County or California, but throughout the nation, the impact of the pandemic, and especially the anti-Asian racism that occurred, really was just detrimental to our mental health. I believe it was one of I think it was Pew Charitable Trust or another a part of the Stop AAPI Hate research found that depression increased. I think it was like 155%, anxiety increased over 100%. In Orange County, we're one of the few mental health providers, and our calls tripled during the time. And it ranged from youth and families feeling isolated and having conflict in the home, elders not wanting to leave their home because they were afraid they would be hurt, and having a lot of fear and anxiety, to small business owners. We had high suicide ideation among small business owners who maybe English was their second language, and they didn't know how to access the loans, how to get resources. Their businesses were going under. They didn't know how to pay for things. They were afraid they were gonna, be kicked out of their homes. And so they just felt hopeless. We got quite a few cases of attempts from emergency departments. And a lot of it also, besides the pandemic issues, there was a lot of racial trauma that came up. And the state, which is so wonderful with like what Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi was talking about, the funding that the API Legislative Caucus really fought for and advocated for, that's going to many organizations throughout the state. A lot of that is for mental health. And many of us across the state are doing racial trauma and healing. And, you know, as an immigrant, as a refugee, as a person of color, you get impacted by discrimination, you get impacted by racism, and it might be internalized. You might think, just ignore it. But different things bring it up. So a history of racism for many families and for many people, the pandemic brought it all up and they didn't know what to do. And so we saw a surge in the need for counseling. But for mental health, there's not a lot of providers who speak another language. And so that's another area we really need to support, is get more community members who are bilingual to go into mental health services. And my final point is victims assistance. A lot of people who were impacted through hate crimes, hate incidences, there wasn't victims assistance that could be provided in language at all times. And so, for example, the case in Laguna Woods that had occurred here in Orange County at the Taiwanese church, it's been a struggle to find Taiwanese mental health providers. And so other churches have come down from Los Angeles to help out. The victims assistance could only be provided in English. They were looking for interpreters. So I think we really need to think about, with this investment of Stop the Hate from the API Legislative Caucus and the Department of Social Services, how could we ensure language access for all, especially around mental health and well-being and victims assistance? Thank you.
Thank you. You know, through the pandemic and the rise in attacks against Asian Americans, we saw disparities. We saw barriers, language barriers, digital barriers, getting services. Sonia, can you talk about some of the disparities that you saw and how that's being addressed? Because there still is a need for the community, because the AAPI community, we say community, but it's really communities. It is so diverse. And when you start looking into those communities, there are huge disparities.
Yeah, so many ways to slice that question, I think, Sharon, but I'll sort of focus it on how our team can or can't be as tactical as we might like to be. And I know this is such a prevalent conversation in our community so often, but you're really talking about disaggregated data, how we collect data, how we respect it, right? There's a lot of nervousness about systems and people being able to access it, especially when we talk about immigrant communities that may, continue to fear their relationship with government is incredibly prevalent. I know many people in California think of that distrust as stemming from our Latino community, our Spanish-speaking community, but it is very much broader, where I think often we get sort of left out of the consciousness. But going to my point, that disaggregation of data looks different. People's level of comfort in sharing it looks different. And so then when we come down to decision making, we saw some disparate rates between our Asian American community versus our Pacific Islander community. Some of that being lived experiences, but then how that manifested itself in us doing our work, again, goes back to the ability to match that challenge with the knowledge that comes from those working closest to those trusted messengers, and really being able to rely on their expertise. Where are those Pacific Islanders, in Southern California, that really need to be able to connect to the why. Why is it important to protect your body, your family with vaccines, with stories, right? Bringing through elders to talk through and really deliver that message in a way that was much more resonant to them, and in a way that just landed much differently. And so again, just a little snippet of how we've really tried to overcome some of those challenges and barriers. And I have to imagine that exists throughout many programs in state government still, local government, all forms.
Thank you, Sonia. And as we continue this conversation, feel free to jump in with any comments that you may have, Marianne or Christina. I wanted to mention a survey. It was by the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State, LA. It was back in March, and it said 2/3 of Asian Americans in Los Angeles County said they were worried about being a victim of a racial attack, and nearly a quarter said that someone had verbally or physically abused them or damaged their property during the pandemic because of their race or ethnicity. So there still remains a lot of fear. There remains, trust issues, and things we don't like to talk about, our own internal biases that we see in, different segments of the AAPI community. How do we go about addressing and erasing that toxicity, Christina?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I mean, I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is just that although it feels like a lot of the mainstream media attention has sort of generally moved on from the big spike that we saw last year, of course, it feels like, unfortunately, every few months, there's still something really horrible that comes, to the surface. Like I'm thinking of the woman in New York that was hit 125 times or something. There's stuff like that that reminds us like, oh, it is something that still remains very relevant. And I think for us at Advancing Justice LA, we're definitely still getting calls on our hotlines about folks who are experiencing incidents of harassment or other hate crimes, hate incidents. And also the online tracker that we have open for folks to submit reports to, standagainsthatred.org. That's available to take reports in both English and in different Asian languages. And one thing that we've just started building out over the last few months is trying to connect volunteers and pro bono attorneys to individuals that actually bring reports to us, either through our hotlines or the online tracker. Because to be quite honest, unfortunately, a lot of the incidents that get brought to us, they're, they may or may not have been in touch with law enforcement separately. There really necessarily might not be any sort of legal recourse there, right? Like generally people are not going to be able to really sue the person who attacked them to any real sort of avail. But folks still need help navigating resources like the Victims Compensation Fund that I know Marianne mentioned briefly earlier, different, maybe there's a civil harassment restraining order that might be possible or helpful, where, things that people can certainly navigate without an attorney or without help if they wanted to, but it can be really overwhelming, especially if you've just been through trauma or you're not, English is not your first language. It can be really hard to figure out where the resources are and how to really navigate everything that's even available. So that's what we've been working on recently, is just having training for volunteers from the private sector who are interested in helping, and then connecting those folks to community members who've reached out to us. There are unfortunately way too many of these reports for us to actually have our staff follow up, and it is kind of time consuming to provide the kind of individualized support that we think is the most helpful. But that's one way that we're hoping that we can be helpful in the sort of current moment that we see continue to unfold in this area. Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. I want to go back to something that you said, Marianne, that calls to your office tripled during the pandemic. Did your staff triple? I mean, how are your resources in dealing with that? And how are things with folks now? Are they more willing to continue with the mental health care, for example?
That's a great question. No, our staff did not triple. We just had to do more work. I think what happened was, with the calls tripling, and especially like schools were asking us to come in to talk about anti-bullying, to come in to do the training, from Hollaback, to talk to parents, businesses, everyone was calling us. So we stayed open because we are an essential service. So we started to do more of the counseling online and through, technology. A lot of community members, we taught them to use Zoom or our HIPAA compliant counseling, online, to be able to gain access. And I think that was really helpful. Or we would do by phone. there's other, the schools let us into their virtual academies as well, their online classes. And businesses would invite us over. So we actually integrated mental health with COVID. And like what Sonia was saying is that COVID allowed us to, the vaccinations really allowed us to do a lot. So we were able to work with our county and have specialized pods for vaccinations. And we would call all the businesses, we call the grocery store workers, all the nail salon workers, people who were exposed, and would have specialized pods in language for them at our federally qualified health centers. The 15 minutes that they wait. So the times we called them, told them the instructions, how to get there, made appointments, were also times we would talk to them about how are you doing, checking in, do you have enough food? How's the rent situation? What's been going on? So we would do check-ins with them. Then we were able to get funding. This was what was really helpful, was we were able to get funding for rental assistance. We were able to get funding for help them to navigate EDD resources. We were able to get the funding to help them to get vaccinated, as well as the anti-hate funding. And so all of those funding resources, even though we didn't triple our staff, we were able to leverage them to assist people. But the time to get people vaccinated and that 15-minute wait time, that's when we could talk to all of them, the restaurant workers, the low-wage workers, and check in for mental health. Then we had 15-minute sessions with them online just to double check, and then they could come into counseling sessions too. So I think everybody became very creative in the way they provided services. And I think we all came together. How do we refer to each other? How do we make sure clinics, came through for us, businesses came through for us, a lot of funders really invested. And I think like what Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi was talking about, the stop the hate funding that came through the legislature was really key, because that now continues for sustainability for all of this and the work that we're going to be doing.
Sonia, do you want to comment on investing in communities and programs and anti-hate initiatives and the work that's being done?
Yeah, and we can drop a link in the chat as well. But so there's a variety of different state teams that are here, and I'll drop this in now really quick. That are focused on this, whether again it be getting that language line that I think the assembly member had mentioned sort of up and running, and a variety of other services as well. As we think about continuing to do public education, we've learned so much in the last two campaigns, and there is a proposal that's being put forward that really will help institutionalize that. But that means, how do we take what we've learned around trusted messengers? How do we take what we've learned around language access? Christina just talked about navigation. If you're an English speaker first, and really trying to infuse some of those practices, even in the way that our state teams approach the way that we work with the public. And so, I think it's an exciting time to be in government, if I could say it. Not that this is a PSA for becoming a public servant, but so much opportunity. I think we've just barely scratched the surface again, whether it's with regard to getting smarter with how we use data, or again, really addressing some of those, language barriers that we see.
Throughout the pandemic, was there a moment or an incident that stopped you in your tracks and made you consider what the heck's going on, that you were not prepared for? And anyone can chime in. I know you're all thinking, was there a moment?
For me, not only was it the number of anti-Asian hate incidences and hate crimes, but it was a lot of the people who were anti-vaccination, and there were death threats to our county's healthcare agency director that she had to quit because her children were being, threatened, as well as herself. And then our current healthcare director, he also was threatened. And one of our board of supervisors was really targeted with a lot of hate. And that really just was like, whoa, you know, when people who are trying to lead and help and being attacked, that was really just shocking to me. It wasn't just everyday people. It was our API legislators. It was, you know, it was famous people. We had, you know, somebody who was an Olympian being attacked here. We had, you know, the number of actors who were attacked. I just was really shocked that it didn't matter who it was. They were attacked. But when the death threats occurred, that was something that really shocked me.
What about you, Christina?
I think just, you know, and it's hard to believe it's been over 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic, but I think for us, you know, also right now it feels hard to remember a time when we were actually in the office 5 days a week. But before March of 2020, we had a very strong in-office culture and for providing all of our services. The community was very accustomed to coming into the office and meeting with our staff to do appointments or get other resources. And so I think, you know, throughout, you know, of course, certainly the March 2020, we had to suddenly pivot to remote. That was very shocking. And then I think just like as the months unfolded and we realized how much longer it was going to have to go on, to just continue to you know, adjust as a leadership team and support our staff in really shifting what is like almost now a 40-year history of being in the office to provide services, really changing that mentality and embracing what technology could bring to us. But at the same time, also acknowledging, as we were talking about on our prep call yesterday, there are definitely sectors and demographics of our community that we have not been able to reach during the last 2 years very effectively. You know, folks either don't have Wi-Fi readily available at home, maybe it's older folks that are not comfortable Zooming and Teamsing or texting as we all are, you know. And so as we have just finally been able to reopen our office to the public about a month ago now, 6 weeks ago, I'm really excited about, you know, let's kind of really embrace hybrid and, you know, let's continue to reach folks virtually where they found it's more convenient, so do our staff, but hopefully also bringing back into the full community members that we have been not connecting with as well or as readily. And so I think, again, it's just really understanding the last 2 years and who knows how much longer we're just going to need to be constantly in a pivoting and, you know, being, I think it's really helped remind me how resilient we are as an organization, as well as the community more broadly. There's a lot that folks can adjust to. And I think that's certainly one silver lining of what I think has been a really difficult time the last couple of years, is that, you know, we can really make it through. We just have to stick together. So I think perhaps back to the AAPI Strong question at the top, Sharon. Yeah.
Yeah, silver linings. In your work, Sonia, you said, you know, 18 months, you're there, you have a big statewide job to do. What did you see that really made you pause and, I don't know, question what's happening?
So many things, it feels like. I would say kind of along the lines of Christina's comments in terms of how technology enabled us in some ways. It had good moments, and how it also constricted us in other ways, depending on who it was. The misinformation that we have seen has been so rampant and so varied. You know, one of the first decisions that we made as a campaign, just really understanding the environment of COVID generally, really, again, that everyone is sort of on their personal journey when it relates to vaccines, right? There have not always been good experiences for every community, and really knowing that coming into this, it had already been politicized so greatly, you know, just the pandemic itself, but then obviously vaccines. And so I think I understood that mis and disinformation existed. I certainly understood that it came in the form of, you know, comments between friends, you know, in the local store, you know, in the H Mart, maybe, as we were picking up a few things. But to see how quickly things can spread, especially in a virtual environment, or even through things like KCAL or through WhatsApp. And the virility of that, matching really the movement of almost, it feels like how quickly the pandemic moved, and really trying to just combat and stay ahead of it. And with just such a dynamic environment, whether it be the locals, the county public health department making decisions, or the state, and just as a member of the public trying to keep up on all these things, at the same time being afraid, to literally walk in my neighborhood, for fear of hate or just, the pandemic itself. So again, a really big undertaking, probably not doing it justice, but Sharon, I would say mis and disinformation being at the top of the list for me.
And that disinformation, as you said, your life, not being able to walk in your neighborhood, that's a consequence. That's a price that did you expect to pay when you went into public service? What are some of the other things that you've experienced over the past year? Inroads that we're making, progress. I know Christina mentioned, some of the silver linings. Disinformation. How do we conquer disinformation? I've been in the media and it's overwhelming to try to keep up with. Who's saying what, why, sources. On a one-on-one level, Marianne, how do you deal with the disinformation?
I think there was a lot of disinformation. And so because we're a trusted resource, and there's so many other community organizations who are also trusted resources, by providing as much information so community members could make an informed decision and, really creating champions. We have 350 community health advocates that we trained and gave stipends to, and they went out and blanketed the community with accurate information or information that they would take from trusted resources, and they would put it out there in ethnic media as well as ethnic social media, like KCAL and any kind of way to get to the community through churches or temples or gurdwaras. They would be talking to everybody and saying, well, that's actually not, correct information. Let me give you the correct information, or, let's talk to this doctor, or let's talk to this person. Or we also had a lot of community forums with legislators, from a lot with congressional members who would provide information about the CARES Act and what's out there, and to provide accurate information. And no one should be charging you to apply for this loan or this, or doing this or this. And then with state legislators, they were coming down. The Attorney General came down several times. Many of the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus came down. So it was and our local legislators too. I think their offices really helped. Also, we work very closely with the county to stop disinformation and to provide accurate information. So sometimes it would be done in small groups. We would have community forums. We would then do education to media, ethnic media and editors, and just say, we need to give you the right information because you can be the champion to stop any of this disinformation. You can make an impact in the community and help save lives, or help do this if we get the right information out there. And so a lot of people really came together, and that was one of the silver linings. We probably never had this much access to the state or to government officials or to policymakers before this. I think a lot of people wanted to know, how can we help? What can we do? We don't want to see this, this disinformation go further. We want to provide the right information. And so that was really great.
And that is one of the things that was different this time around, the high level cooperation and how it spread out through levels of government and also the community. I want to remind you that feel free to send a question. There's the function at the bottom of your screen where you can send a question, because we will devote some time at the end of our conversation to what's on your mind. So go ahead and do that. And, thank you for participating in the chat. One of the things I saw had to do with how do you talk to your kids about what's happening? If mom can't walk down the street without fear, mom is getting a death threat, a colleague is getting a death threat, or you're exhausted and your work has taken an emotional toll. How do you talk to the kids? And I'll let any one of you jump in because I see, heads nodding.
This was something that was brought up all the time, and a lot of parents were calling us, a lot of schools were calling us. Schools were afraid that when they took summer break, there would be no resources for parents. And so we really created in-language gatherings to talk to parents. How do you talk to your kids about this? Because they're afraid. A lot of them, even if they were in schools where there's a predominantly Asian student population, they were still bullied. And so how do we create a safe environment? So we started with the schools and with the teachers, and they were so great. And school districts really stepped up and said, how do we create a safe environment? Can we have these presentations for parents? We'll provide the interpretation. We'll do all of this. And Zoom really helped because they trained all the parents and we would be able to do it in language. The second is having young people have activities or having mental health types of wellness types of things on how do you deal with trauma and stress and anxiety, and how do you talk about it as a family? How do you gather safely and have some wellness walks? Let's all organize and spread out at this park, and let's all go, and we'll be spread out safely, but let's all be together and walk together. We did a wellness walk, and all sorts of people joined in saying, what's going on? We're doing this. We want to support you. We want to do this too. And I think that really helped families when they saw there's these incidences that are happening. It's small in comparison to the number of supporters. And how do you have that neighborhood gathering? There was a incident in South Orange County where a family was targeted multiple times to the point of they were harassed. And what ended up happening is the entire community and neighborhood in Ladera Ranch came out and celebrated Lantern Festival and stood by all these families and their kids and to say, we are here as your neighbors and we are here as your supporters, and whoever comes and harasses you has to stand up to the entire neighborhood. And so the teens or the group that were harassing this family left because they saw this neighborhood stood up. So I think it can be anything from wellness and self-care and how to do that and how to be okay with that, finding those resources if you need counseling to get that. But it could also be having these conversations and having neighbors gather to make you feel safe and secure. And that was something really nice we saw. Neighbors helping neighbors. You don't have any toilet paper? I'm going to go to the store. Let me search for you. You don't have this? Let me help you. Our elders are needing support. Let's go out and do this. And so we saw during this time a lot of hate, but we also saw a lot of people coming together. And I think that's the reminders that we would do for families and their children.
Yeah, that's really beautiful to hear. Speaking of the media, when you see repeated images of Asian elders, being pushed down, being assaulted, our kids see these images. They're on social media. They're, the TV is on. Christina, how do you talk to the kids, put it into perspective, age appropriate things?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, and I was mentioning in the chat that it's a question that comes up pretty frequently. If we have time for Q&A after our bystander training, is parents asking about how can they talk about these incidents that either they've experienced themselves as a family, or perhaps things like Sharon was saying that just come up in the news, or maybe kids hear about it from their friends at school. What's a good way to talk about it? Because of course, I think for me at least, as someone who has young kids, and it's definitely still learning about having these conversations with my own children. I think what's really important is to not be afraid to be honest with your kids. I think kids are incredibly intuitive. They really, even if you don't say something's wrong, they can really pick up on that vibe, so like if you're with them and you're harassed or someone throws a racist slur at you, like they may not know what that means, but they will pick up on how you're responding, even if you're trying to hide it from them. So I think it's really important to just have those conversations openly. And as Sharon was saying, in an age appropriate way, you don't have to, go into, a whole lot of detail, but certainly to even, I think, just to acknowledge what that person said was wrong. They're saying something about me or our family just because of how we look or our last name or the language that we speak, and that's not okay. And just really bring it to a level that they can understand, because if they're there and they're witnessing it, then they have to process what they go through too, even if they don't necessarily totally understand what's going on. So that's really how I respond, I think, to when that question comes up. And there are a lot of really great resources online about how to, just even to begin to not really even talk about racism, but just like, what is race, what is ethnicity, like how can we be respectful, like really bringing it to those broader concepts of how to be a great member of society and a good community member. I think there's a way to bring these sorts of incidents to a sort of positive message overall, and why we wouldn't want to treat someone else in the way that we've just been treated. Oh, I think you're on mute, Sharon.
Sorry about that. Sonia, your thoughts. I mean, you have children, but you have the state's children to consider.
Yeah, indeed. Luckily, my child is only 10 months old. We're getting very, very close to, I think, words, but fortunately I get to, I think, avoid some of these conversations for the near term. But to your point, what are some of those other services? I think going back to just partnerships and leaning on trusted messengers, we've done some really great work, with our county public health departments, with the Department of Education. But one of the things that we also saw around harm reduction practices, sort of coming back and feedback and some of the work we were doing was really around bullying of kids themselves and wearing a mask as sort of a signal of what you did or didn't believe. And so if I wore a mask, did that mean I was, whatever, and maybe my parents didn't have the same beliefs as your parents, and so I don't wear a mask. And so just this like very interesting conflicts happening, at that sort of school setting. And really it was an opportunity for us to act and really put out some messaging around kindness, which, heaven forbid you think about, it's 2022 and we have to remind people to be kind. But I think it was a reminder that again, going back to some of the introduction, you don't know what's happening on the other side of that fence, right? Having an immunocompromised body is not something you can see sometimes. And so, living in an intergenerational family with my harmony at home, and I don't want to bring COVID home to her. That always doesn't get said out loud. And so, just trying to remind those kids that it's okay. And we really got to remember to be kind to each other and again, not make those assumptions that we don't know what's happening. So that was a pretty cool thing that our team got to pull together.
Looking at some of the questions from people in our chat, folks would like to know what inspired you to work in your field. What inspired you to work in your field? Christina, you're a lawyer, but you're so much more.
Oh, thank you, Sharon. I actually first heard of Advancing Justice LA, which was then known as APAL, when I was a sophomore in college. At the time, our former litigation director, Julie Sue, was working on a really incredible multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition building class action against Abercrombie and Fitch that was engaged in some really discriminatory workplace practices. This was right around the same time they had those racist shirts that came out. So I remember being involved in protests as a college student on the East Coast about the shirts, but also really keeping track of the lawsuit as well, which there were plaintiffs that were AAPI, they were Latinx, they were Black, and just feeling really inspired by the work that Julie and her team were doing here at Advancing Justice. And that's really what got me thinking about going to law school. And I was lucky enough to be able to spend a summer with Julie and the litigation team, as well as a year-long fellowship right after law school when Julie was still here. And then from there, I did go to the private sector, to the firm for a while, but really always wanted to come back to an AAPI serving organization. And when I realized that litigation wasn't where I wanted to spend the rest of my life, I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time when the pro bono director position here opened up almost 8 years ago. And the rest is history. And I just feel really privileged and honored to get paid to work in an organization like Advancing Justice LA. And I am always really humbled by the work that our programmatic staff are doing on the ground. And I'm really happy that I'm able to support it.
Sorry about the delay. Thank you, Christina, for sharing your background. Marianne, what inspired you to become a community organizer and so much more?
It was my parents. As I said before, my family came here. I'm half Chinese, half Japanese, fourth generation, and our family came here in the 1850s. And they were, because my mother is Japanese, my father is Chinese, it was like two different races getting married, which I was like, well, you're the same. But all of the conflict, you know, with China and Japan. And my mom had been interned also during World War II. And so they both taught me all about civil rights. They were very involved in civil rights. They talked about, and their best friends were Black, and they talked about, you know, segregation. I'm quite a bit older than most folks, but you know, they would remember things like, you know, when you could vote, how they couldn't go to certain stores. Growing up, my mom would point to all the stores that wouldn't allow them in, or she would talk about, you know, oh, that's the parent that used to throw things at me when I came back from camp. And because of them, they always taught me, you know, you need to fight for civil rights. And so really think about the community and treat everyone, you know, with respect. And then after that, I was encouraged by my brother to work in Oakland, Chinatown for APCHO, Association of Asian Pacific Community Health Organizations, and just learned so much there about resilience and about healthcare. And from there, kept working in the community. And that kind of was my healing from, I had been really impacted by racial trauma. We had an active Ku Klux Klan, you know, I had been chased and attacked. And I didn't realize how much I needed to identify with my Asian American roots and my history, and to learn the stories of our communities and be proud of who I was. And once I started working in the community and hearing all the things that the community has done, really made me proud. And that was my healing. And so that's why I've only worked in the community and love it.
You have lived a lot of racial conflict, and it's remarkable the work that you've done and continue to do. Thank you, Marianne. Sonia, you've devoted years to public service. What inspired you?
Thanks. Pretty incredible. I decided to pursue a business degree at Sac State because it was close to home, because of course my mother couldn't let me go very far. And I thought it would be the best thing to do because I wanted to be a corporate attorney. And I don't know that I actually knew what that meant at that time, but I just knew I wanted to be an attorney. And here we go. And so the summer between my first and second year of college, you know, of course, Dad, in his good way of encouraging, said, you know, had a chance to meet with some of his colleagues from work, and he said, "What are you going to do this summer?" So I have no idea. And they said, "Well, you probably should get an internship, Sonia. Think of you're going to have to get some work experience at some point here. Get ready for the end of college." I said, "Okay, fine." So I ended up getting an internship at then Lieutenant Governor Bustamante's office. And one of, I think, the funnest, most important roles of that office, I got to sit at the front desk. And you get to be the face of the office. Most importantly, you get to be the interface with the public. And again, didn't think these things then. And so one of the roles that we had, of course, was answering the phone. And so there was one time, and this would happen frequently because you'd get, activists that would, plan lobby days, et cetera. And so something had to have been going on that day. And so this gal calls the lieutenant governor because he's also second on the list. So all the folks are calling the governor's office. Nobody's answering the governor's phone. It's like rolling over to like the busy signal. And they say, she says, I've tried to call the governor so many times. Nobody's answering. And here I am, just the intern on the other end answering the phone call. And so she had this particular issue. Somehow her husband had gone through cancer treatment. Something had happened with insurance. Long story short, didn't have access to the insurance. So somehow I hooked her up, called the ledge line, managed to get her somebody, I think at the time, DHCS, Department of Healthcare Services, I can't remember. Didn't think anything of it. And a few months later, I had landed a role with that office, a full-time paid role. I couldn't believe it. Someone said, hey, Sonia, there's a woman on the phone. She wants to talk to you. I said, okay, I have no idea who this person is. And she called back to say, I just wanted to call to say thank you. You took a few minutes to help us get what we needed. And I wanted to tell you my husband's in remission. And so ever since then, it sort of gives me chicken skin to think about her voice. But it just gave me this pause that when government really connects with people, we can not only help solve problems, but dare I say, save lives. Full circle, that's what we're doing today. But I think really helps them in the moments that they need someone else the most, the moments that they need, us the most. And so ever since then, I continue to be a student of government and just want to continue to improve delivery of government services. So.
And there are those life-changing, life-saving moments. And people, I think what we're getting from our conversation is people want to be seen. People want to be heard. People want to be respected.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few more minutes before we close out this conversation. We have one more question. What we saw this time around was activism by young AAPIs. And we have a question from Rebecca Elliott in our chat. What piece of advice can you give younger AAPI leaders? Let's start round robin again. Christina.
I think for me, what's important to share with young leaders is that I think that there's always something more to advocate for, something more to fight for. And I do feel like we have come a long way as an AAPI community, since the founding of our organization, which was right after the murder of Vincent Chin in 1983. Things have changed so much, but I think as both my co-panelists have touched on, certainly things have changed, but there's still, a lot that still needs to be done. So I would really encourage AAPI student leaders to stay involved, whether that's on your campus or afterwards. You don't necessarily have to go into public service as your career, but there are lots of ways to stay involved outside of your day job as well. And so would certainly encourage you to, keep carrying that forward, even after you're no longer a student.
Sonia, your advice to our young leaders.
My advice is probably impacted with current state of affairs in another place, sort of all the discussions around Roe v. Wade and really not taking for granted that progress, right? There are so many people that have these tireless efforts to get us where we are, but we need to keep investing in leaders that share our values, that look like us. There isn't an API Democratic woman that serves in the state legislature today. And so for when I think about, my voice in some of these policymaking places, where is it? And so just, being involved, not to make this about any particular party by any means, but just being engaged and holding those elected officials accountable too, making sure that you continue to work with them. Right? They get voted in, but they stay there because of you too. So making sure you call them, making sure you tell them your ideas and thoughts, and really continue to see them as partners and allies too, in keeping the progress and making even more progress as well.
Thank you, Sonia. Marianne, your advice to our emerging leaders, AAPI leaders.
I think exactly what Sonia said is, my background is health education and public health. And what I learned early on was policy affects everything. So you have to be involved in voting. So here we are, a health agency, mental health, workforce development, working with youth. One of our largest programs is Civic Engagement. It wasn't until we started doing nonpartisan civic engagement and getting voters out, working on census, redistricting, and voting, did we start to see some change. So I can talk about public health, but unless I have the backing of saying, well, we just reached out to 160,000 voters and they said the following. So you need to listen to your constituents. This is what we need to see working. So no matter what your background is, no matter what you're interested in going into, whether it's public health or education, policy is key. You have to, so take classes on policy, learn more about civic engagement, volunteer for a voting program, a GOTV program, learn that aspect, because our votes are the most powerful voice that we have, and that's the way to make change. And so that would be my advice. Take classes on policy.
Thank you. All good advice to everyone. Thank you for putting the links in the chat with some of the resources. Again, I want to thank our panelists. This has been a refreshing, engaging conversation. And I hope folks who are watching that you received something important from this as well. Thank you again to Christina Yang, General Counsel and Pro Bono Director, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Los Angeles, Marianne Foon, Founder and Executive Director, Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance, Inc., and Sonia Harris, Senior Advisor, COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force, California Department of Public Health. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to the Cal Asian Chamber for hosting this second in a series of 3 roundtables, AAPI Strong.
Thank you, everyone, for such an extraordinary discussion. This is May Sepan, Vice President for Programs here at the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce. A lot of helpful insights and very inspiring experiences were shared today by our panelists. I hope everyone in the audience heard something that resonated with you. Please share your favorite quote or moment in the chat so our speakers can see it. And for those who saw the video earlier, called News from Home, a brief acknowledgement to our filmmaker, RK Studio. It was a strategic decision made by the director, Tanya Martineau, that everyone who worked on this story came from the AAPI community. From the director to the producer and film set assistants, the story was crafted and delivered by a team of AAPI creatives. And thank you again to Sonia Harris for her remarks at the top of the program, as well as roundtable participation. And of course, our appreciation to the Assembly member and to Sharon, Christina, and Marianne for supporting this event and for all of your very insightful and inspiring sharing. We are grateful to Wells Fargo, Verizon, PG&E, East West Bank, EASE, and the PepsiCo Foundation for sponsoring this event today. Stay tuned for our upcoming events, especially the Crisis Communications for Small Businesses, which is scheduled for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Be sure to register through the link that we'll send in our post-event message. This concludes our roundtable event today. Thank you and enjoy your afternoon.
I'm in love with the shape of you and the way you move. I'm in love with your off-brand shoes and your daddy issues. See, I don't need more than simple things, just a simple kind of love. You don't need to buy me fancy bling. See, all I need is you, 'cause baby,